All right, what are we talking about tonight?
John 2.
John 2, I agree.
Second chapter.
All right, oh good, we're up there. Okay, that's
A
good.
wedding and a whip.
Oh, well,
And not
that's
a
the way it
name.
usually works. Where'd you register for on it? All right, well, okay, so I will take us through an outline, kind of in a preview of the things in John chapter 2, and then you'll jump into the text with us, and then we'll wrap up. And we'll see what time it is when that happens. All right.
All right, yeah.
Okay, here we go. So, outline of John chapter 1, we're gonna kind of break it down this way. The first 11 verses cover the wedding feast in Cana, at Cana in Galilee. And I'll put a map up here in a minute that kind of show us the locations that we'll talk about as part of John chapter 2. The wedding feast of Cana in Galilee, and that section breaks down into a couple of smaller sections. We can talk about the problem that arises at the feast, and really, that problem kind of leads into maybe some other discussion about things that are going on. What are the problems that are being dealt with surrounding the running out of the drink of choice, and then how Mary chooses to deal with it, and the way Jesus and Mary interact with one another. Is there a problem there as well? Jesus, of course, being the ultimate problem solver, has an answer for what's going to happen next in verses 5 through 8. And then we see the reaction of the people, and remember what is the framework that John hangs his narrative on? Those 7 signs, right? And this is that first sign, and so seeing how people react to that sign is really important for what John, he's not telling us what Jesus does just for the fun of it. He's telling us for the purpose of what he's trying to establish in us. So seeing that reaction of the people is an important part of that story. We don't want to overlook that. And then the next section there, verses 12 to 17, we see the cleansing of the temple. And Jesus going to the temple, and probably most people know that story of him going into to the temple and then seeing the things that were taking place there and not being happy about it. And we'll learn about some things that offend Jesus in that section. And that's probably a good lesson for us to learn. We don't want to offend Jesus. And then verses 18 to 22, the next section there, we have Jesus questioned. By what authority do you do this? Why are you in here throwing people out of the temple? What gives you the right to do that? You're not an overseer of the temple. You're not a priest. You're just kind of a regular guy, and we don't understand why you're doing this. And so as a part of that, they ask for a sign, which is an important theme through the book of John, as we just mentioned. So the request for that sign gives us a foreshadowing of the greatest sign that John presents to indicate Jesus' identity in the book of John. So that kind of sets us up early in the book for where we're headed when Jesus mentioned those things. And then the last couple of verses there, we have the observance of the first Passover, at least preparation for that observance. And we see that many people believed as a result of the things that Jesus was doing. And then we see Jesus' interaction with some people that I think are trying to get in good with him, or maybe trying to influence him in some ways. And we see how Jesus interacts with people who are not genuine. And we'll see that. I know it's probably hard for y'all to see. Well, maybe it's probably easier to see on that than it is on my screen. But if you recognize the shape of the Bible lands there, the Dead Sea. Can I do this button? There it is. Dead Sea down here. In the middle of that circle right there is Jerusalem, which you would know. And then way up here is Cana, right there. And Capernaum is up here on the northwest corner or side of the Sea of Galilee. And we have a mention of Cana and Capernaum. I think, was Bethany last chapter, or is that this chapter as well? I can't remember. Bethany was last chapter, I think, wasn't it? So chapter 1, we talked about Bethany, and we know we were around the area of Jerusalem last year, also in the last chapter. But the cleansing of the temple is going to take place down here in Jerusalem. So Jesus, we start out at Cana, go to Capernaum, and somehow end up down here at Jerusalem. I'm sure Justin will tell us how that happens.
They walked.
There you go. End of story. All right. Okay.
Might have rode a camel out or a donkey. I don't know.
Well,
They didn't-
maybe.
I mean, there's no transportation mentioned, but they just appear. So
All right. Okay. We ready to jump into the text?
Sure, let's do it.
Okay, so we'll look at the first 11 verses, and here we go. On the third day, there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there, and both Jesus and his disciples were invited to the wedding. When the wine ran out, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." And Jesus said to her, "Woman, what does that have to do with us? My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Whatever he says to you, do it." Now there were 6 stone water pots set there for the Jewish custom of purification, containing 20 or 30 gallons each. Jesus said to them, "Fill the water pots with water." So they filled them up to the brim. And he said to them, "Draw some out now and take it to the head waiter." So they took it to him. When the head waiter tasted the water, which had become wine, and did not know where it came from, but the servants who had drawn the water knew, the head waiter called to the bridegroom and said to him, "Every man serves the good wine first, and when the people have drunk freely, then he serves the poorer wine. But you have kept the good wine until now." This beginning of his signs Jesus did in Cana of Galilee and manifested his glory, and his disciples believed in him.
All right. So again, we'll get out our detective's hat, I guess, if you will. And we'll look at this passage, at least designed like this. So the first question is, who are we talking about? Who is this? We've got Jesus, his disciples, and his mother. There are other people here at this wedding feast, but these are the people that are specifically mentioned. Now, each of these people obviously are significant. Jesus and his disciples are very significant. You know, we know we had a discussion of who has joined him. You know, there are different callings of different disciples in chapter 1. And so now we have Jesus, his disciples, and finally his mother. Now, his mother may not necessarily be such a big deal to you and me, but there are other, other is not the right word, but there are religious sects that place a lot of significance on Jesus' mother. And there is something to be said, I think, in this passage tonight as we look at that. We may highlight that as their interaction looks very different and looks kind of, I don't know if interesting is the right way of putting it, but it's an interesting interaction. So when does this happen? Now, it says the third day. Now, me and Jason kind of had this silent discussion about some of these chronological themes in John, and how potentially this doesn't necessarily have to be sequential. How the third day could have been, John wants to tell you about 3 days, and this is just the third of the 3 days he wanted to tell you about. And so, last week, the first day I ate some chocolate, the second day I had, was at a Bible study, and the third day I did this. Well, it doesn't necessarily mean it was Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday. There can be a gap in between the days. This is an important day that I want to bring about, because we talked about this because the following days in the book of John can sometimes get confusing because we have the other gospel accounts, specifically like Mark. We have the baptism of Jesus, and Jesus is drawn into the wilderness for 40 days. And so if we say, well, this day, then this day, well, where did the 40 days go that he was in the wilderness? And so the chronology of the third day doesn't necessarily mean 24-hour period, 24-hour period, 24-hour period. It's just, here are days that are important that I want to tell you about. So the third day, we go to this wedding at Cana. So, all of this in mind, what's going on? So we're going to backtrack a little bit and get into the text a little bit, verse by verse. So the third day, a wedding took place at Cana in Galilee. Now, weddings are very, very important. About 2 or 3 weeks ago, Rob at Lions did an entire sermon devoted to the wedding ceremony, the wedding feast, and the things that go on, and how it could be multiple days of feasting and all of these different things, and how their engagement was different and all of these different things. But the Jewish wedding was one of the pinnacle aspects of their culture, because one of the biggest things for them, at least for the Jews, was continuing the line of Abraham, continuing the line of David, multiplying and filling the earth with the good little Jewish boys and girls. And so, weddings were very, very celebrated, and it was probably one of the biggest parties that they would have ever, taken part in and had dedicated to them was their wedding. Sort of like it is today. I mean, there's a little bit different significance to the wedding. But it was a very big day. And so there's a wedding. Now, Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples had been invited. Now this should, I don't know if tell us something about Jesus is the right way of putting it, but Jesus was invited to a wedding. The people sent out invitations and they said, well, on Shutterfly we have 35 and we filled 34, but we can get one more out there to Jesus. Let's send him one. But anyways, he was invited to the wedding. So Jesus invited to the wedding. This should show us at least a little bit that Jesus was either somewhere connected to the wedding party, but there's also, I have read that Jesus was just such a wise and respected person that people wanted them to come to their wedding to bless them at their wedding and bless their marriage because they wanted Jesus, the special guy, to bless them. Now, I don't know if we can really put stock in that, but Jesus was invited, potentially as Jesus' mother was there, so his mother also probably knew or had a special connection to the bride and groom. So anyways, however it happens, Jesus is invited to this wedding. So verse 3, when the wine was gone. The wine was gone. So this was a big deal. This was one of the biggest parties they're ever going to throw for this person in their life, and they inadequately prepared. They were not prepared for the feast that was happening. Now, there have been some funny, awkward, and embarrassing things happen at many weddings in the past. I don't know if you can think of any. I don't. My wife said my name instead of hers. It was kind of funny. She said, Justin. I'm Lindsay. So anyways, there are some embarrassing things that happen at weddings. But this was a small town. This was, a wedding. The entire town was surrounded around this couple, celebrating them and their marriage and their future. And for them to run out and inadequately prepare for people was a very big social embarrassment. It would have labeled them for the rest of their lives. Their culture was also one of reciprocity, of giving gifts in order to get something in return. And so coming to a wedding, there was even records of lawsuits of people coming to a wedding and not bringing a gift that was good enough. And there would be a lawsuit against them of, we prepared this great feast for you, and you didn't bring something that was adequate for us, because we brought you to this party, you bring something to the party for us. And so them not being able to provide for their guests was a big deal. But they ran out of wine. So Jesus' mother said to Jesus, they have no more wine. And I just think that's funny. Maybe you don't think it's funny. I think a lot of things are funny. But, Jesus' mom, again, we can speculate a lot of things, but she had been told by Gabriel, Jesus is special. She probably was even, maybe, I don't know if ridiculed is the right word, but even if they don't believe the fact that Jesus was the Son of God, she had some very interesting situations that went along with her pregnancy with Jesus. And so part of this, there's that aspect of things to think about, of what was her involvement in the community. But so apparently, it's now on Jesus' mom, I guess, to provide wine because they ran out. And so Jesus' mom, Mary, says, I know what I'll do. I'll ask Jesus. So she goes to Jesus and says, they have no more wine, which is a great statement. She just says, they have no more wine. For me, sometimes when people say statements, you kind of have to get your little detective hat back out and go, okay, well, they have no more wine. What exactly are they saying? Well, they're asking me to do something about it.
I like the way Mary gives Jesus a nudge in the right direction. She does. She says that they have no more wine. And he says, well, what does that have to do with us? And then she turns to the attendant there and says, do whatever he says. It's like, that was a gentle nudge for Jesus to do his thing.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah.
It is a little. I don't know if amusing is the right word, but again, Mary comes to Jesus and says, they've got no more wine, and Jesus replies, and then her reply to Jesus' reply, which was really, Jesus says to him, why do you involve me? My hour has not yet come. It's kind of like I'm really not.
That's my problem.
Yeah, it's not my problem. It's really not necessarily my problem, but his mother taking that sort of subtle refusal and saying, okay, yeah, do whatever he says, do whatever he tells you. So I think it is very amusing that Jesus' mother was kind of aiding him in this direction. I think, again, I think so, along with all of this, Jesus will say other times that I do nothing that my Father does not allow me to do. Many times in John. And so, this was another time when God was I don't know if allowing is the right word, but Jesus and God were in together in this little huddle saying, okay, we can do this. Yeah, we can perform this miracle.
So when Jesus says, my hour has not yet come, but then he does it anyway. So had his hour all of a sudden come because Mary said it had come?
Is that a question for me?
That was, I asked the question. It is your problem. 'Cause
Okay,
I just
well,
asked you, yeah.
So it is. What is it to me? Here is the best. So why Jesus says that is because, and again, I had to write a paper similar to this a couple years ago.
I knew it.
About Jesus's time coming, and so his time coming was and especially in John is pointing toward the time when he is going to be crucified. And so if Jesus begins, and I think the end of this chapter has something to say about this, if Jesus begins doing all of these signs and being very flagrant with his divinity, the Jews will round him up and kill him. And so his hour has not yet come because he does not necessarily want all of that publicity and all of that, the repercussions of performing these miracles to come down on his head. But, as we see, the result that people begin to follow him is what happens by the end of the chapter. And so I think that the balance between this is Jesus is saying, my publicity, my PR man, I will be too open, and my hour is not yet come. I will be crucified before my time has come if this gets out. But he eventually ends up performing the miracle because, at the end of the chapter, he does not give himself to them, and he avoids the outcome of him being crucified early, I believe, is kind of the interplay between this.
He didn't make a public spectacle of this either. I mean, this was done, fill the water pots with water, and so there was very few that knew what had happened. So it wasn't like it was out to everybody.
I think the reason this is so interesting and enjoyable to read about is Jesus is saying this isn't our problem, and Mary turns around and makes it his problem. and it's not that she outsmarted him really, but in a way, she was not going to let it go. And Jesus loves his mother. He wasn't going to make a scene. I think it's just a sweet interaction.
Yeah, I agree.
That's what I think. I think he was just fulfilling the request of his mother.
Fulfilling the request of his mother. I think there's some something to be said there that, Jesus obviously has great love and respect for his mother. We see that at various interactions throughout the gospel stories. And I think he yields to her wisdom. I think he yields to her leading on that as her son. And Jesus said, well, wait a minute, it's not my time. And Mary said, yeah, it kind of is. It kind of is your time. I know why you've been sent, and it's time to get this ball rolling. Sam?
I think it's interesting that the first problem he solves is one he says is not his problem, and ultimately the problem he solves is of our sin.
Yeah.
That's not
It's not his problem. Yeah. Jesus is a problem solver, and none of them are of his making. Not a single one of them.
I think it's interesting, though, in verse 9 that it points out that only the people knew that were around him. Not everybody else knew
Right.
what he done.
It is a very inconspicuous, in some ways, miracle that he performs. It doesn't draw the attention of some of the other miracles that he does.
I think those are all wonderful, wonderful points, and it's great to kind of see this interchange. One of the things that I had read quite a bit about is verse 4. Jesus' first word to his mother isn't mom, isn't mother, isn't the word for that. It is the word for woman. And I don't know if you know my mother, but I don't think I ever tried this. Clean your room, woman. It is not my time to do that. But that's not the way Jesus was saying this. Okay, just to throw that out there. This term isn't necessarily the term for mother. It's not a maternal. I don't know what you call those words, like endearment. It's not a maternal endearment. It's not, oh yes, mom, I'll do that for you. No, it is woman, and part of the reason it is still respectful, it's like someone saying lady, maybe a little more respectfully appropriate, I guess would be a different translation into Southern English. But, woman was, a lot of people put quite a bit of, a lot of scholars that I read, put a lot of emphasis on the fact that Jesus was referring their interaction, their relationship now is different. When you come to make this request of me, you're making a request of your son. But the way that I am going to interact with you is I'm going to say woman, not mother. And so I am respecting your need as a woman, not as my mother. And so I now have a heavenly Father. I have a heavenly mission, and our, familial ties are not necessarily weakened, but they are less important to me than my ties to my heavenly Father. And we see this played out a couple of other times when it says, your mother and brothers are at the door. And Jesus says, well, who are my mother and brothers? And so, take that as you will. I tend to agree a little bit that the relationship dynamic, Jesus is saying, I am transitioning into my period of ministry, and that is going to involve less of a relationship with you as my son, or your son, and more of a relationship with you as the Savior. Now, again, make of that what you will. It's kind of taking one word and taking a lot out of it. But I think there's a little bit of something to be said about that. So anyways, getting back to the story, the feast runs out of wine. Jesus' mother says, what are you going to do about it? Hey, come on, it's your problem now. So Jesus has them fill the purification jars. Now these jars, are 20 or 30 gallons is what they hold, and they're for the ceremonial washing. So people come to your house, they wash, different body parts and different stuff like that. And that's what these jars are for. But Jesus says, fill these jars with water. Now I have a question, and this is anyone can answer this question. Could Jesus have made those jars full of wine without the water there? Sure. And so what that leads lots of people that I read to assume is that during this miracle, and when Jesus performs miracles, he enjoys our participation. Or maybe not our is the right word, but participation of other people. And so these servants are being blessed by being able to be, at least in some part, tied to this miracle. They get to physically serve the commands of Jesus, and yet Jesus, nothing that they did was miraculous. They put more water in these jars. But everything that Jesus did was miraculous. And so Jesus, says, fill these jars with water. Now these servants, what is it? How full did these servants fill these jars? To the brim. Now, they weren't slacking. When we get a command is a good word. When we get a command from Jesus, do we ask, well, when? Can I do it after I watch my TV show? How full do I need to do? No, these servants filled the jars to the brim. They didn't stop at the rim. They didn't stop at, okay, that's good enough. No, they filled them to the brim. And I think there's something that is important there. And again, this kind of following back to what Mary said. Mary says, do whatever he tells you. And we don't have very many statements that come out of Mary's mouth. There's the Song of Mary, and there's a couple other things when she talks at different times. But this command of Mary to these servants, I would like to, kind of put ourselves in that place. Do whatever he tells us. When Jesus tells us to do something, let's do it. And let's be eager about filling the jars to the brim. And when we're asked to serve, filling our serving to the brim. When we're asked to love, filling our love to the brim. When we're asked to be generous to the brim. And again, maybe that's a little bit of a stretch of what's going on here, but I just thought that was a really fun application. So anyways, back into the story, again, as I said multiple times. Now draw out some water, verse 8, and take it to the master of the banquet. And they did so. So one of the things that is pointed out here is that this miracle was immediately verified. That he immediately said, take it to the master, and the master takes a drink.
Go back just a little bit. For one, we don't know how many servants were obviously more than one, so at least two, but 6 jars. But a gallon of liquid is 8 pounds. If these were 20 to 30 gallons, that's not something they can pick up and carry. If they were going back and forth to wherever the watering hole was,
it wasn't something that happened, they didn't hook up a garden hose. And I mean, this took some time.
Yeah.
Exactly, yeah, and as you were saying this, I was remembering one of the things that I was thought of doing was taking, trying to bring one of them horse troughs that had, the similar, 200 gallons, similar to, 6 of them with 20 to 30 is anywhere from 120 to 180. Gotta check my math on that. I was wrong last week, so yeah, I think that's close. But that's 150 some gallons of water that they would have had. And now these jars were likely not completely empty because they were there for the washing, so they probably still had some in them. But yes, they had to transport this water. It took them effort and time to get this done. And we just skip over it, and they filled it to the brim. Well, that probably took quite a few trips, and we don't know how many were there, but it would have been I don't know if tedious is the right word, but a task to be done. And so, this guy tells us to fill the water back up. Well, that's going to take some time and effort and energy. And just when Jesus calls us to do things, do we have the same enthusiasm and energy and effort placed into fulfilling what he asks for?
And it's a testimony that they had more than one set of eyes to it too.
Yep.
More servants gives more credibility that somebody, kind of like when they went to the tomb, they took people and they didn't just steal the body. There's a lot of witness statements to back up what they're saying actually occurred.
Right.
And so we have this great story of turning water to wine. They did so. They brought it to the master of the banquet. He tasted the water that was turned to wine, but he did not realize where it come from. But the servants did. The servants knew. And so the master calls the bridegroom aside and said, everyone brings out the choice wine first, and then the cheaper wine after the guests have had too much drink. But you have saved the best till now. Now, what would have been a social disaster, a social embarrassment where we've run out of wine, Jesus has turned into, you have saved the best for last. And I think that was, another maybe big application for us as well, is that Jesus, in this instance, even cared about the joy of this occasion. And again, I say that lightly because this was not, as an aside, going into all of this, Jesus turning water into wine business very quickly because we don't have a lot of time, that this wine was likely very, very, very diluted, as much as 2 parts of wine to 3 parts of water. Maybe it's only like 1 part to 2 parts, but still it was very, very diluted. And so Jesus wasn't saying, everybody, I got the good stuff, let's get hammered. That was not what Jesus was saying. Jesus does not say that. Just so you know, I repeated myself a couple times. Jesus does not say that, and it is very, very likely that Jesus was not saying the good stuff means, good stuff is really, really, really alcoholic. No, it just means that it was good wine, which I don't know what good wine is. I don't know. I don't think I've ever tasted wine. I don't think so. I smelled a lot of it this one night that we were working this deal. It was just disgusting. We're working for college. They had us sent out to this deal. Anyways,
Stop talking.
I'm stopping. We were doing a service for people. Anyways, stop it talking. Brought out the good stuff. So, anyways, wedding at Cana ends, and we are moving on from Galilee. All right, here we go.
Okay.
Back to the text.
Next section, 12 to 17. After this, he went he went down to Capernaum, and his mother and his brothers and his disciples, and they stayed there a few days. The Passover of the Jews was near, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. And he found in the temple those who were selling oxen and sheep and doves, and the money changers seated at their tables. And he made a scourge of cords and drove them all out of the temple with the sheep and the oxen. And he poured out the coins of the money changers and overturned their tables. And to those who were selling the doves, he said, "Take these things away. Stop making my Father's house a place of business." The disciples remembered that it was written, "Zeal for your house will consume me."
So, Jesus cleanses the temple. Now, that's usually what this is called. Maybe Jesus clears the temple courts at other deals, but Jesus cleanses the temple. So, who did this? Jesus. When, again, this was the third day of Passover. The third day is when John says it is, but Passover was the actual date in time in which this is placed, which is important. I should have written that on my slide before we got it up, but I went back and said, oh no, I didn't do that. So anyways, when it's Passover. And now that is important because what is happening in Jewish households at Passover?
They're making sacrifices, animal sacrifices, or.
Killing the Passover lamb.
Is this when they do the grain, is what they do according to what they can afford?
Yeah. Well, and so there is that sacrifice element of the Passover, and that is, there is this idea that they have to, I believe they have to take the tax to the temple, which is a 2 days' wage, and so these, what do they call these temple people? Money changers, that's the word. The money changers are changing whatever coin they brought to temple coin, because the temple only accepts certain coins, and so that's why they're called money changers, is because, you have 5 of your denarii, well, I'll give you 2 temple coins for your 5 denarii. Okay, here you go, you got your 2 temple coins. And so that's what they were doing. And so Jesus, full of zeal, made a whip of cords and drop the money changers. I think I was trying to put drove, but I went to drop. So my typo, my bad. Anyways, and drove the money changers out of the temple. So what I was getting at a little bit earlier was during Passover, there was one specific thing that they were to throw out of their house. They got completely rid of every piece of this in their house. Leaven. They were cleansing their house of yeast. And so part of the significance of this is Jesus is cleansing the temple of the yeast, the leaven of the money-changing people there. And so Jesus cleansing the temple has this similar idea of them cleansing their households of Passover. And so Jesus cleansing the temple where? The temple of Jerusalem, obviously. That the little dash is the court of the Gentiles. And that is the likely, so again, this is more of a deduction. But the only place in the temple that they would have been selling these things would have likely been the outer court, the court of the Gentiles. Right. And so, again, maybe this is drawing conclusions a little bit too far down the line, but there is in the temple, and again, this is the court of the Gentiles, but it's still a part of the temple, there are animals and birds, which not necessarily bad in and of themselves, but any type in the old law, that any type of animal feces was denoting this area unclean. And so when these animals are in the court of the Gentiles, yet they're part of the temple, they are part of the only place that Gentiles can go to worship God, there is an, inherent uncleanness because of the way they have all of these animals in here. And so Jesus was, by driving some of these animals out, the animals, why it's specifically mentioned, is because likely Jesus is cleansing this, what I just say, the other word was unclean, there's a word. Cleansing these unclean animals out of the temple, but also a little bit more behind the scenes of John, of making the gospel of what Jesus was saying, the temple, the only place the Gentiles could go to worship. Jesus was kind of combating the Jews that were kind of, raining on the Gentiles' parade, if you will. The Gentiles, you got to worship out here, and the only place where you can worship is going to be a pig pen. And we're going to have the all these animals out there, and the cattle and sheep and doves and all these disgusting things that are unclean are going to be in your guys' temple, while we've got a good temple inside. And so part of the significance of this might be that Jesus was allowing the place that Gentiles to go and worship also be cleansed.
They were making it a place of commerce, and it's not a place of commerce.
Yeah, they turned it into something what it's supposed to be, and along with that, I've read some things that it was most likely not even honest commerce. It was they were gouging people. They were taking their, they'd come from all areas of the region, and they might have money from other places, and they didn't give them a good exchange rate. They would rob them of their money, and they would take the animals that the families brought with them to offer as sacrifices. The priest would examine those, and they'd say, well, that animal's no good. It's got a blemish, or it's got a limp, or it's got something, or it's weak for making the trip, and so you can't offer that one. But we've got one here we'll sell you, and then, oh, you don't need that one anymore, we'll take that one off your hands, and then you go right into the pen where they'd sell it to the next family. And so there were just lots of dishonest practices going on, that they were making dishonest money, not just good money.
And so Jesus, full of zeal, he made a whip of cords. I've heard quite a few lessons about how, well, this anger of Jesus was not a temple tantrum. I've heard that before. It was not a temple tantrum.
Brother.
It was a calculated act of cleansing the temple. Making a whip of cords isn't something that you just go, oh yeah, I have now a whip. No, he had to somehow create the whip of cords, and so it was a deliberate act that he continuously considered that this was what he needed to do. It wasn't just I'm really mad, let's go do some stuff.
I think that's a great point to make a distinction between zeal and anger, and I appreciate that point. That's good.
When that's what they said at the very end there, he was full of zeal. He will be full of zeal for my
Right.
Father's house.
But God, Jesus was always ready to defend God and to make a point to the people who were not approaching him holy and righteous.
Right. Yeah.
Right on. Well,
Next.
let's continue on.
Continuing on, John 2:18-22. Then the Jews said to him, "What sign do you show us as your authority for doing these things?" Jesus answered them, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." The Jews then said, "It took 46 years to build this temple, and you will raise it up in 3 days?" But he was speaking of the temple of his body. So when he was raised from the dead, his disciples remembered that he had said this, and they believed the scripture and the word which Jesus had spoken.
So the authority of Jesus is questioned. The reason why I put that up there is because some guy just made a whip and drove a bunch of people out of the temple of the Lord. And so the Jews, they seem, and maybe this is me reading into it, but they seem a little bit nonchalant about this. They just walk down there and they're like, by what authority are you doing this? But maybe that's just me reading into something. But it was possible that they were running down there furious of, why are you, shutting down my money-making schemes? But when does this happen? So after the money changers are sent out, the Jews ask him a question. What sign are you going to show us that your authority to drive all these people out is real? And so a man has shut down their money-making schemes of the temple. It's shut down the potential slight on the Gentiles for making their place of worship a place of uncleanness. And they ask, by what authority are you doing this? Can you prove this to us that what you've done is justifiable? And so Jesus answers, I'm going to rebuild this temple in 3 days. And so again, one of the things that has been said is that these Jews who are responding with this sign, what sign can you show us? What Jesus has performed, this is kind of John's play on things. Just, a couple verses ago, Jesus showed a sign that will show us that he has authority to do certain things. And now the Jews are asking him for a sign, but he foreshadows the ultimate sign of his authority to come through his death, burial, and resurrection. So he answers, I'll destroy this body or destroy this temple and raise it up in 3 days. And they are incredulous of, it took us 46 years to build this temple. And how are you going to do this in 3 days? Yet John kind of adds in, he was talking about his body. And, us as the church are referenced now as the body of Christ. And so, we are, I guess, kind of now the temple of God. And one of the things that, again, John is kind of writing into his story is that the temple has been destroyed. AD 70, Titus, I believe his name, Titus, and a Roman general comes in and just destroys the temple. And so John, including this story, is saying the temple is gone, but Jesus' body, the true temple, is what matters. And through the other readings that we have, we are now the temple that matter. We are now the body of Christ, the temple that really matters. Let's look to that. Let's look to our connection to the Holy Spirit. And Jesus will later say, we're not going to worship on the mountain or in Jerusalem at the temple. We're going to worship, wherever we're worshiping in the Spirit and in truth. And so,
Yep.
we'll move into the last couple verses.
All right, closing out the chapter, it says, "Now when he was in Jerusalem at the Passover during the feast, many believed in his name, observing his signs which he was doing. But Jesus, on his part, was not entrusting himself to them, for he knew all men, and because he did not need anyone to testify concerning man, for he himself knew what was in man."
So Jesus, the knower of hearts, again, who Jesus, when, I didn't put that on there, but he's in Jerusalem at the Passover. What does he do? He does not entrust himself to them. Why? Because he knew what was in man. And, I think this is, again, kind of foreshadowing what is to come. Jesus is performing signs, and there are people that are following him because he's performing signs. He will reiterate this after the feeding of the 5,000. There will be a great crowd following him, and Jesus in John 6 will say, your bellies are full. That's the only reason that you're here. You're seeing signs and wonders, and that's why you're following me. You don't truly believe in my name. And after this, many people fall away from following Jesus. They don't follow him anymore because they no longer get the bread from heaven. They no longer are fed. The signs are no longer enough for them. They're only there because, wow, magic, that's the wrong word. Miracles are amazing.
It's an interesting thing to consider that Jesus basically there, at this point, he is performing his signs publicly, and people are following because of those signs. And he's giving them the opportunity to make that adjustment from following him because of signs to following him because of who he is. But at some point, the novelty's got to wear off, and he is going to lose patience with those who follow him just because of the signs. And he basically, after the feeding of the 5,000, as you mentioned, he invites them not to follow him anymore. If that's the only reason you're here, you're wasting my time and your own time, and you're taking up space that could be used by people who really want to follow me because of who I am. And so, talk about hard lessons or hard applications to make. That should be a cause for self-introspection for many of us, maybe as well, about why we follow Christ and what we're looking for. And we need to make sure that we're following him for his reasons, and not making up our own reasons. All right, ready?
All right, yeah. Let's
Okay.
get into the...
Let's look at John's use of the word glory. So we've got through the chapter. Let's go back and kind of dig in a little bit into this little bit of a nugget here, maybe. In John 1:14, John still in his introductory section of the opening of the gospel, declares that the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we saw his glory. Glory is of the only begotten from the Father, full of grace and truth. So there's something about Jesus' incarnation that reveals something to us about God and about who God is, that can't be revealed to us any other way. It can only be revealed to us through Christ, which is kind of a remarkable thing to think about in the first place. That we don't like to think of God being limited in any way, but if God wants to show us his glory, showing us his glory through Christ is a big step. He can't. There's something about God's glory being revealed to us through Christ that can't be revealed any other way. And so that's I think a theme that we'll see through John. It's not a huge amount of times that the word glory is used, but it kind of pops up here and there. Every now and then, all of a sudden, something happens, and the word glory kind of flashes across the page. And so we'll take note of that as we see those. But in chapter 2 that we just read, with the conclusion of that first sign, so the water has been changed to wine, the servants know what happened. Obviously, Jesus' disciples know what happened because they're with him during that whole time, I think. So it says in verse 11, this beginning of his signs Jesus did in Cana of Galilee and manifested his glory, and his disciples believed in him. So this idea of manifesting God's glory, and we talked about the word manifest Sunday morning, it's the complete revealing, or the revealing of something in such a way that it can't be refuted or it can't be misinterpreted. So this manifestation of Christ's glory takes place because of the sign that he performs. He performs a sign, and the glory is revealed through the performing of that sign. And then because of that glory that the disciples see, that leads to their belief. Okay? So then that leads to kind of this discussion. What is the significance of seeing and recognizing Jesus' glory?
So the significance of seeing and recognizing. So,
Knowing that he's from God.
Isn't that what John's trying to get across to us? Isn't that the thesis statement of the book of John? These signs are recorded so that
You may believe.
we may believe. And so the revealing of Christ's glory and the recognizing of that glory for what it is as a marker of God's, as a marker of his identity, his divinity, is I think a key theme for us. So how is Jesus' glory made evident by the sign in Cana? What was it about turning water into wine that happens? And John says, because he did this, boom, there's God's glory.
so actually, I have
You have a thought?
I have a thought.
Okay.
It might not be a good thought. I have lots of thoughts sometimes. Some of them aren't very good. But so, and maybe this is a little more specific to the sign in Cana, but at Cana, what Jesus does is he takes water. You know, it's full to the brim, but Jesus takes water and transforms it into wine. And, you know, one of the bigger picture pieces of things that we can learn from Jesus transforming something that was completely water into something that is completely wine is the transfer of Jesus taking something that is completely dead and making it completely alive. And the transforming power of Jesus to transform something like water into wine is all the more evident because he can take something that is dead and make it alive. And I think, again, pairing this water to wine incident, you know, what was the thing that water was turned into in Exodus?
Blood.
Water to blood.
And
so
life is in the blood.
Life is in the blood. Well, yeah, it's full circle. Anyway, you know, in the Old Testament in Exodus, one of the 10 signs, the 10 plagues, if you will, of Egypt and Pharaoh is to turn water into blood. And that is really what the God's glory was being shown there, was through the might and power.
Turning the water into blood made it unusable. It
Mhm.
contaminated.
It was contaminating.
It's the opposite of what Jesus did.
Yeah, he turned it into something good, something that is good to drink, something that is healthy and good for us as we continue on. Greg.
You know, reading earlier today in Matthew, in the Sermon on the Mount, chapter 5, verse 16, in the same way, let your light shine before men, that they may see your good deeds and praise your Father in heaven. And I remember Gary, you know, saying what our purpose, and the purpose here is to glorify God. And Jesus, by showing his glory, was also glorifying God.
Yep.
So I think there's something to that word, you know, that we are to be, whatever we do should be glorifying God and letting our light shine, as he mentioned there, our good deeds and so on, to praise our Father is really what we're all supposed to be doing. You know, that's our primary purpose, is
Yep.
glorifying God.
You're right. And I think Jesus, in this, using this event to kind of launch his earthly ministry, to launch his public revelation to people about who he is beginning that process of glorifying God. And we see that as we follow that theme of glory through, I think the most dramatic uses of that word glory are we'll find those in John chapter 17 during that high priestly prayer, where Jesus is praying specifically that God would glorify him and he would glorify God and they would glorify one another. So this is the beginning of that process. This is the beginning of John makes the statement in John 1 that, you know, we have seen his glory of the only begotten from the Father, full of grace and truth. And this is the beginning of the revelation of what that means, what that looks like in the life of Christ. So is there true belief without an acknowledgement of Jesus' glory? Can I claim belief in Jesus without acknowledging his glory as God's Son?
I think.
Obvious answer.
Well, no.
Okay.
But I think they're very tied, because you can't. I mean, the reason, the thing to believe in is Jesus' glory,
Yeah.
and so you can't. I mean, I guess the way that I separate this is, you know, there are those of the Muslim faith who think Jesus was just a good guy. There was no glory within Jesus, and so they don't believe in anything. But when we come to believe, we are believing in his glory, in his glorification, in the fact that his glory, again, from John 17, that him and God have glory together and that he is on the same level of glorification as God is.
Yeah.
And so you can't believe Jesus is who he says he is and believe in a, I guess, proper mindset of the term without acknowledging the glory of Jesus.
And so in John 2 then, when the miracle manifested his glory and then his disciples believed in him, did they not believe up to that point? Or was their belief limited because because this revealed more of who Christ was, this revealed more about his identity, and so their belief was deepened?
I would have to say the deepened option.
Okay, the deepened option. They did, they believed in something. They followed him for some reason.
They left
But
everything
this,
for some
yeah,
reason.
but this reaffirmed that, and it made their belief even deeper. So for us, as Christ's glory is revealed to us through the stories that John tells us, what do we want to see happening to our belief? We want to see it get stronger and stronger every step of the way as Christ's glory is continually reaffirmed. Wrapping up, keywords for me were sign, believe, and glory. And just a parting thought, the more we focus our view on specific details of John's narrative, which we're kind of doing as we read through these stories and we get, as I call it, we get into the weeds sometimes, as we really get down deep into some of these things. It's kind of like putting a puzzle together and only looking at one piece of the puzzle at a time, and then you get all the pieces snapped together and you don't know what the picture is. We don't want to do that. We want to keep in mind that big picture of what John is trying to do for us, even as we zoom in on those individual pieces of the puzzle. We want to retain our view of both of those things. So I love the detailed and how tight we zoom in sometimes, but let's not forget to zoom out and look at the big picture.
So say John 2, again, I was kind of scrambling as I was putting this together, but so my final thoughts is fill those jars to the brim. We're the servants in God's kingdom, and as Mary said, do what he says. If Jesus tells us to do something, let's go do what he says, but let's do what he says to the brim. Let's love, let's forgive, let's be out there serving and being the people of God to the very brim, because our lives are transformed from water, from what we were, unto wine, something totally new and different and clean. It's not, Jesus didn't add anything, Jesus transformed fully. And so let's transform our lives completely. And so one of the things maybe this is something that the two main points from the two things that I got out of these sections of Scripture was Jesus transforms our lives. He takes us from water, transforms us into wine, takes us from dead to living. And then he continuously cleanses us like the temple. There are sometimes he's going to be pretty zealous to cleanse our lives of the things that we're doing. But Jesus will transform our lives and continually cleanse us as we live in his kingdom. So, thank you. Right. John 3:16 is in there, so we're going to get into that. That's going to be great. And 17, and 1 through all of the rest. So,
good cover. All right.